Hello students, it's Dr. Yu. We're now in part 2 of the Making PowerPoints video lecture series on elements. Now, here's what we're going to do is first, we saw that we need to design to grab attention. And part of that is by creating a layout for our presentation that is easy to follow and also speaks to whatever it is that we're talking about, because that can also make it interesting too. Now we have to be focused on glance media, because part of the issue is that our PowerPoints are only up there temporarily. And then we're going to deal with the third challenge of synchronizing with the presentation and the third and final part of this lecture series. So we've done design to grab attention, and now we're on to creating glanced media. So let's get to it. Here's what we're going to discuss in this part of the lecture series. First, we're going to look at what is the printed communication continuum. And I want to show you this because it's going to help provide some insight as to what you're actually doing when you create a slide. Then, we're going to briefly talk about how you can use and visualize text. And again, I would refer you back to Data Visualization Part 2, Textual Visualization, if you want more detail on that. But we will talk about it briefly. Then, how can you effectively deploy pictures? And we'll talk about the use of pictures in your PowerPoint and how you can seamlessly display video. Let's get started. I want to show you the printed communication continuum, and I think this is really important because it'll provide more context as to what you're actually trying to do when you create a slide. On one end of the continuum, you have something called a document. Now, a document is something that's going to be high text, low visual. So your business memo, your business letter, your newspaper, well, newspapers have pictures, but your business letter or memo would be something like a document or an IRS notification. It's going to be mostly text. So high text, low visuals. There's not very many graphics. There's not any pictures. There's no clip arts. There's no photos. It's all just text. The typical book that you read, you buy at Barnes & Noble, unless it's a kid's book, is just going to be text. It's a document. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the opposite of a document is a slide. A slide is going to be maximum text, maximum visuals, minimum text. So a slide is the opposite of a document. Whereas here, it's maximum text, minimum visuals. This is maximum visuals, minimum text. A slide is meant to be glanced at. A slide might only be on the screen for like 2 or 3 seconds, depending on what you're trying to do with the slide or what your purpose is with the slide. So slides have to be made to not be read, but to be looked at or to be glanced at. And those are two very different things. Now, here's the problem that a lot of people have with PowerPoint. People realize that, yes, I can't just be 100% text because that's a boring, not synchronized presentation. That's just not going to go well. And they recognize that, yes, I need to make sure it's visual and graphic and all that stuff. But they fail to actually move to this side because they end up doing something in the middle, which is what we call a brochure. A brochure has visuals, but it also has a lot of text on it. A brochure is meant to be read. You hand out a brochure, you fold it up all nicely and stuff, and then you hand it out to people when they're walking down the street. And you say, here's this brochure. The problem is a lot of people, they think they're doing PowerPoint, but what they're really doing is they're just putting up brochures on the screen and reading us brochures or showing us brochures. A brochure should just be a brochure, and you should just hand that out. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make a slide. A slide requires a presenter to be fully understood. Now, we'll talk about leave behinds later and what if I need to make sure somebody gets the information even if they weren't there. We'll talk about that in part 3. But for now, you have to know there's a difference between a document, a brochure, and a slide is meant to be presented with a presenter. A brochure is meant to be handed to people that they can read on their own without needing a presenter, as well as a document. Now, we talked about there being 5 elements: text, charts, graphs, smart art, pictures, and videos. Now, I will say a little bit more about text that wasn't discussed in textual visualization. When you're using text, let's say you have to do a bullet point slide. Okay, so if you're going to do that, I would say number 1, make sure you have less than 5 text lines per slide. This goes back to the rule of 5. Anything that has more than 5 lines is hard to speed read. And you remember, you want your text to be easy to speed read. But secondly, you also want to have less than 5 bullet points per slide, because the rule of 5 essentially says that, you don't want things in groups greater than 5. Now, you might have 4 bullet points that take up 7 lines. But here's the thing, bullet points naturally guide the eye, so you can tolerate 4 bullet points of 7 lines because the 4 bullet points help guide your eye. But once you go to 6 bullet points with a bunch of lines, then those bullet points start to lose their power. Bullet points have power when they are grouped in small groups. They lose their power when they're put in large groups. Also, shorthand writing. It's okay to write in shorthand in PowerPoint because you just want people to glance at this. You don't necessarily want them to read it. And then also use graphic highlighting. So using bolding, using highlighting, using arrangement so that certain things can be sped read really fast is really important in PowerPoint. Now, I'm not going to go over this in detail again, but the quick crash course on textual visualization is create the nodes. So remember, establish what are the ideas that I'm trying to convey. Determine the relationship. So how do these ideas relate to each other? And then visualize the action. And that's how you have textual visualization. You really should be more inclined to do things like this in PowerPoint than doing the 5 bullet point slide. Because remember, slides are meant to be glanced at. They're meant to be something that are supposed to support you as a presenter. Now, it may be hard sometimes to do all the graphics and figure out exactly how to visualize text, at least doing it manually. You have to use the shape tools, and I'll show you that in a second. But there is this really nice feature on PowerPoint, and this is one of the reasons I love PowerPoint over all the others, Google Slides or Prezis. All those are just not good because of this PowerPoint feature. And that is this thing called Smart Art. Smart Art is this little button here. It's represented by this little icon here. And when you click on Smart Art, PowerPoint can already do a lot of textual visualization for you. And then all you got to do is just plug in the text, and then you can play with the format and colors and such. And then you can have some really beautiful looking Smart Art in your PowerPoint that's not those typical bullet point slides. And in fact, with Smart Art breaks it up into types of relationships that you want to show. So you have lists. So if you want to do a bullet point slide, I would go here first. I would just go to list because these are independent nodes that don't have any sort of relation to each other. Then you have process, cycle, hierarchy, matrix, pyramid, picture. And we could do a whole lecture on just Smart Art alone and playing with Smart Art and modifying it and doing 3D Smart Art and colors and all that stuff. But for now, just know that this exists, and this can make your life so much easier. But sometimes Smart Art can be a pain to work with, and sometimes you want the Smart Art to do something and it just doesn't do it the way you want to do it. So that's when I resort to shape tools. My other best friend when I do PowerPoints. So shape tools is just represented by this little icon, and I just manually draw it. I pick up some squares, pick up some lines, some arrows here. So these are your relations, and then your rectangles and all those things. So when I'm doing PowerPoint nowadays, my two go-tos are Smart Arts and shape tools. That's mostly what I use when I create PowerPoints. If you learn to practice with these things and to visualize text, you'll become obsessed with them too, and that'll make your PowerPoints more graphic and visual. Now, there is an argument for something like this. There was a study done by Garner and Alley, and they did it in the International Journal of Engineering Education, where they presented slides in 2 different ways and basically did like a little controlled case group study. And why can't I think of the word right now? A 2-group comparison study. And they had, one group look at slides that were presented a certain way, and then another group look at slides presented a different way. And then they asked them which ones did they think were more effective. And here's what they found. So a lot of times when you're doing engineering slides like this, or things that have a lot of technical components, this is what we're tempted to do. We want to do the bullet point slide, and we want to kind of put the graphic to the side because we think the text is more important. But when you present like this, what they do is this is called the assertion evidence approach. You put the assertion at the top, and you just put it in one single simple sentence. So it's not a 5-sentence assertion. You just put one, and then you highlight the graphic, and you let the graphic speak for itself. That was picked as more effective and shown to be more effective when people were asked what they remembered most than a slide like this, because you see it's all texty and whatnot. This goes back to the Medina's pictures over text, or something I'll talk about later, pictures over text. Now, you can also see here tumor size versus survival rate. And you can see that it's a list of tumors and, some math here and, well, at least not math, but just numerical comparisons here. But if you just do a graph with a thesis at the top, it's more effective. This was the more effective slide than this one. Now, this sounds very familiar, doesn't it? In data visualization, we talked about telling the story and putting the story at the top of the slide or putting the story on the graph. Now, remember, there's a difference between the story and the title of the graph. So that's one thing we always have to remind people. So put the thesis or the takeaway at the top of the graph and then support it with the graphic here. And that can be very powerful. So if you're in just some really technical field where you're just really worried about text and like, oh, but if I don't have that much text or if it's all visualized, people are going to miss the point, do something like this then. Still, this is better than this, for sure. Now let's talk about pictures. Pictures are very important to PowerPoint. They're what people expect PowerPoints to be. After all, they're supposed to be visual aids. Visual aids are things that you look at. Pictures are things that you look at. Now, there are three different types of pictures. First, you have icons. Icons are just very abstract representations of a particular item. Now, I use icons a lot in my PowerPoints because icons save me so much time. If I were to use the other two types of pictures, I'd have to look for them and go on the internet and try to find something that I think would fit. Icons can contrast with backgrounds really well. You can change the colors of them. So I like icons a lot. And in PowerPoint, there is an icons feature where you can deploy icons onto your slide. And I highly recommend them for symbolic pictures. But we also have clip arts. So clip arts are more graphic. They can look drawn or look computer generated. And I know you all remember this guy, those of you who use Windows 95 and Office 95, but don't worry, he's not moving or talking to you. But yes, these are clip arts. And clip arts have a role too in PowerPoints. They can help picture things and make things more visual for people, as long as it's not annoying like Mr. Clippy here back in the day. But then there's a third option, which is photos. Now, photos are, of course, going to be your most realistic representations of things. So photos, you have to, and we're actually going to focus more on photos in the next slides here. But yes, there are very effective ways to use photos and then also very ineffective ways to use photos. So here are the effective ways, I think, to deploy photos in your PowerPoints. Icons and clip arts, you can search those within the PowerPoints insert images feature, but I really want to talk about photos for sake of time. Now, photos are very special. You always hear the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So let's see that at play. Here's a child just jumping up and down. Now, notice that I don't have anything else showing. This picture takes up the whole slide. This is what we call a full bleed image. So if you write full bleed, just full and then bleed, this is a full bleed image, meaning the picture takes up the whole slide. There's nothing else showing. I'm putting 100% focus on this child having a good time. Full bleed images are great. Sometimes in PowerPoint, you don't need text. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and the picture will get the point across without you having to say or without at least you having to write or display anything. Sometimes just let the picture speak for itself. Don't always feel like you have to put text on everything. As you give the presentation, people can look at the photo and listen to you, and you can contextualize the photo without having to put in text. Here's another photo. Now this is a more sad photo. It's a child crying. And I want to use this photo to also make another point. I know we're not on persuasive speaking yet, but I always like to allude to it at least a little bit because it's one of my favorite topics in communication. If you're ever trying to persuade an audience, the way you persuade an audience to care or to really think about something or to relate to something. If you want the audience to relate to your topic, show faces. People relate to faces. People don't really relate to abstract concepts very well. I mean, you can, but it takes some special work in terms of how you paint pictures with your words. But if you have pictures themselves, show faces. Faces with emotion, faces that we can see the eyes and the mouth and the emotion behind whatever it is that you're trying to convey. If you're trying to convey happiness, show happy human faces. Don't use emojis. Emojis are abstractions. Use human faces. If you want to show sadness, show sad faces. Humans relate to faces. That's what you want when you're trying to persuade. So little persuasion lesson aside, and now I'm getting sad looking at this picture. So let's move on to the next one. Now, let's say you do want to put some text, like you really want to contextualize the picture. Okay, so you have options here. Of course, remember, think about your grid. What are my grid rules? Where am I putting things? How am I compartmentalizing my grids and modules and such? So maybe you want to put this on the bottom here and have a quick, simple statement. This is totally fine. Even though it's a complete sentence, it's one simple sentence. And I might even say it as I present the picture to everyone. I'll say, see, it's the simple things in life. And then this picture comes up with the child jumping up and down. But you might make a design decision and say, actually, I want this at the top. Cool. Either way, you still have the text, and the text isn't blocking the photo or taking away from the photo. It comes from the top, and then the photo is still, and like the key thing that you want is right in the center here. Sorry to ruin the photo, but the audience is going to look here first probably, or at least going to want to focus here. Even if they see this text up here, this is probably where the eye is going to want to stay because you're seeing the child have a good time and it's adorable. So that's nice. But you also have a third option. So if you want to do like a big photo like this and you want to still have some text on it just to contextualize it, you can also do this too. So here, what you're doing is you just take a text box and put a mat behind it. So this white little box here, you see this box here and where this box is here and how it goes around. This is what I call a mat. So to ensure that the text contrasts with the background well, you want to make sure that you have some kind of mat behind it. Otherwise, you end up with a situation like this. And you can see that can be really hard to read. Like if this was projected on a screen, the audience might have a hard time reading the symbol, especially if you're far in the back and such. So adding a mat behind the text will still allow the text to be read and then still allow us to enjoy the picture. Now, this is another picture that I pulled off the internet here, and it's of a dog in a crown. Now, it doesn't look bad as is, but one other thing you can do with pictures to make them look a little bit more, we'll say, not so copied and pasted from the internet, is you can do things in PowerPoint such as add a frame to them. And you can play with frames to make them look different ways. So I added a frame to this picture just within PowerPoint to make this look a little bit more like it's an object within the PowerPoint, and it just gives it a little bit more personality. And I can change the color of the frame or the thickness of the frame, and that makes it pretty cool. But also with PowerPoint too, you can play with things and you can have a little bit of fun. So let's say I want to make this picture have a little bit more personality. Even a little tilt can give it a little bit of just a little bit of a different look. So personality, after all, is how you diverge from the norm, if you will, or what makes you unique and idiosyncratic. So here with the picture, it being not perfectly flush, 180 or 90 degrees or 180 degrees, makes it perfectly good. Makes it perfectly interesting and totally fine. Now, depending on the point I'm trying to convey with this picture, that maybe that's a good idea or maybe that's not. But yes, play with frames, play with those things as well. Lastly, let's talk about video. There's really two things I'm just going to show you with video. If you have to deploy video, the biggest thing you need to make sure you do when I watch people deploy video in PowerPoints is make sure you embed the video within the slide deck. So here, I'm about to play a video. Now, I'm going to show you two different ways to embed the video. The first way is to download the video, have like a hard copy of it on your computer, if you will, and then upload the video to your PowerPoint. It's going to increase your file size by quite a bit because it's going to be the size of the video, and videos generally are a couple megabytes depending on the length and quality. But here, let's watch this video, just that's embedded. and see how easy it is for me to just show it instead of having to close PowerPoint, because this is what I really see. I see people, when they have videos, they have to close PowerPoint, open up YouTube, and you have to watch the commercials and all that. Then you have to open up PowerPoint again. We're avoiding that with this.
With that, let's look at the question, what is a job?
Now, something else I want to say. I know he's talking, but I want to make sure.
Because
he actually has pretty good slides. I actually saw this presentation live. So I was at a workforce development conference back when I was working at the Career Center, and
some of you have heard
I saw
me
this
say
guy present,
before,
and his slides inspired me to learn more about PowerPoint.
Is not in the business of creating.
Let me see if I can. Oops. Let me go back here. I need to change my pencil out. So let me go to the arrow here.
With that, let's look at the question.
So I'm just going to speed through some of the slides here.
From last think of as an employee
relation. So you have full bleed
relation.
images here,
but the idea
and then you see how he has an image here, and then he has text to the side. So yes, he's talking about the future of jobs, and he's going through the Industrial Revolution. So lots of full bleed images, great. Doesn't need to put text on everything. And then when he does need to make a point, okay, so he has an image here, he has a mat on the back, he highlights the number with the text.
What I want to say about this is
and notice how he's staying to a consistent theme here. So even though this slide here is yellow and it's of a B, he still keeps the same font. Now, I think he kind of could have maybe put a mat behind relationship because you can see the white and the brightness there, but that's okay. That's okay.
Solution of a use jobs, as I was saying, as a metric.
You can see here he does that. Now, there's some things I can do better.
We can't live
okay, he has a preview slide, which I like.
Project.
You can see I use previous slides. Now, this could be better, so we could critique this graph if we wanted. If we wanted to do data visualization, I think I see some room for improvement on this. But overall, like, there's some good ideas in this deck, and I really like this guy as a presenter. I met him, and yeah, he's just great. He's just great. So that's an upload version. Now, what I'm also going to show you, this is a TED Talk from Nancy Duarte. She's a big PowerPoint person as well, and you can see YouTube's already preloaded it, and it's going to play. Now, this isn't uploaded to my slide deck. I just did an insert online video, put the URL of the YouTube, and then PowerPoint naturally will load it, assuming you have internet. So make sure you have internet access whenever you do your presentations, which you should nowadays, but who knows. And you can see all I have to do is hit play, and it's going to show the PowerPoint, or it's going to show the video. Now, we can look at her deck real fast. The problem is TED doesn't super focus on the decks too much. Like, it'll switch between the presenter. So just kind of the minimal, like, maybe make a small point. Then she has some images with frames. So she doesn't do full bleed, but she keeps that background. And then you can see, I'm going to turn this off. And then you can see the frame here. Now, I don't know if she did that on PowerPoint or if she edited it on another software before doing that. But even something like this, if she found this picture, she probably just could have put a frame around it, maybe add a filter to it, and then just tilted it to have that little look to it. And then, yeah, just simple pictures in our PowerPoint. Now, this is a TED Talk, so of course it's not going to be super texty. And then, yeah, I mean, she's showing how a dramatic story structure is. And yeah, so totally you can watch her presentation on the structure of good communication, of good speeches in the past. And yeah, lots of visuals. Everything's visualized pretty much. And if she does have text, it's very minimal. And that's one thing you can take from Nancy Duarte. And she's the author of the book that I reference in this class for you to read. Oops. So let me continue going. So as a review, what is the printed communication continuum? You have text on one side, you have slides on the other, and you have brochures in the middle. You got to go all the way. You got to go hard or go home. Go slide or go home if you're going to do PowerPoint. If you're going to try to do a document and put that on the slide, that's not going to work. If you try to do a brochure and go on the slide, that's not going to work. If you want to just do brochures, make brochures, hand it out, give it to the audience ahead of time, and then just take a Q&A at that point. But if you're doing slide decks, you got to think way differently about what you're showing and what you're not showing. How can you use and visualize text? We talked about textual visualization and even the assertion evidence method. If you're really concerned about the audience missing something, do the assertion evidence approach. How can you effectively deploy pictures? I showed you the difference between icons, clip arts, and photos. I showed you how to use photos, both as a full bleed image or an image with text. Make sure you deploy those mats. That's a very common mistake I see when people try to go the full bleed route. And how can you seamlessly display video? I showed you two different ways to embed the video in the slide deck. Notice here I never had to leave PowerPoint to show you the video. Everything was just seamlessly displayed, and we had a good time watching 2 videos. In the third and final part, we're going to talk about synchronization. I'll see you there.